Captain David Hart Dykes stood on the bridge of HMS Coventry, the South Atlantic wind biting at his skin. He knew an attack was imminent, a shadow that had loomed for days. He could not yet perceive its true target, nor the intricate, fatal chain of events already set in motion. Within the hour, his advanced warship, a symbol of modern naval power, would be a rapidly sinking wreck, and 19 of his crew would not see another dawn. It was the 25th of May, 1982, deep within the Falklands War, or the Malvinas as Argentina called them. Argentina had seized the islands, and now, to hold them, they needed to eliminate the British naval presence. 2 pairs of Argentinian A-4 Skyhawk jets, led by Captain Pablo Cabello, roared low over the islands. These were old aircraft, poorly equipped, with no radar or warning systems of their own, but they carried a payload of bombs and the fierce determination of their pilots. Their mission: to strike at the heart of the British fleet, specifically HMS Coventry and HMS Broadsword, which had moved closer to the islands, providing cover for ground troops. This proximity, however, also offered the Skyhawks a chance for a close, undetected approach. The Argentinian pilots flew as low as humanly possible, hugging the contours of the land, an almost suicidal strategy to evade detection. On board HMS Coventry, Captain Hart Dykes had his crew on high alert. Intelligence had warned of an Argentinian sortie, but the specific target remained unknown to him. Then, 4 contacts appeared on the radar screen, confirming his deepest concerns. Immediately, he ordered action stations, and across both British ships, alarms blared. The mighty Sea Dart surface-to-air missiles on Coventry began to turn, preparing to engage. As the Skyhawks approached Pebble Island, they used its terrain as cover, disappearing from British radar screens. On Coventry, the contacts vanished. This was precisely what Captain Hart Dykes had feared. Pebble Island was too close. The Sea Darts had a considerable minimum range. If the aircraft were too near, they couldn't be engaged. In a moment of sharp realization, Hart Dykes radioed HMS Broadsword. His ship carried long-range Sea Darts, while Broadsword was equipped with shorter-range Seawolf missiles, better suited for a close-quarters engagement. Captain Cabello, in his lead Skyhawk, brought his men close to British vessels, as the land would allow. Lacking onboard radar, he relied on visual confirmation. At 10 nautical miles, he and his wingman, Lieutenant Carlos Linque, spotted the ships. They accelerated to maximum speed, skimming mere feet above the waves. Aboard Coventry, the Skyhawks briefly lit up the radar. Adding to the confusion, a British Harrier jump jet reported in, flying 20 miles out within the firing zone. A British plane and enemy aircraft in the same airspace, a split-second decision had to be made about firing the missiles. Yet, the operators couldn't get a lock. The Argentinians were flying so low, Cabello's canopy was covered in sea spray, that the radar struggled to track them. On Coventry, hearts pounded as the enemy grew closer, the Sea Darts stubbornly failing to acquire their target. Captain Hart Dykes felt the dread of a decision made too late, silently urging Broadsword's Seawolf missiles into action. On Broadsword, the crew could clearly see the approaching targets. The Skyhawks were so close, the Seawolf radar detected them as a single aircraft. The system locked on, and the Argentinians barreled down toward them. But then, the single contact split into 2, overloading the missile guidance system. The missiles became unresponsive. Commands to restart echoed, but there was no time. Lookout support on Coventry shouted with alarm, seeing the Skyhawks with the naked eye. In a desperate final effort, Coventry's deck guns roared to life, joined by individual bursts of machine guns and rifles, as sailors fired from every available position. Cabello saw splashes of shells striking the sea, the tracers of British bullets drawing closer, refining their aim. The enemy ship was right there. He could almost taste victory, but the shells were too near. He knew they wouldn't make it to Coventry. With a decisive command, he ordered his flight to swap targets, setting their sights on Broadsword. The two planes pulled to the side, away from Coventry's immediate fire, and roared past her deck, lining up their pass. They pulled the triggers, releasing their 1,000-pound bombs. The bombs fell, hit the water, and redirected upwards, skipping like stones across the ocean surface. Broadsword sailors watched in disbelief as two massive bombs bounced twice, before heading directly for them. One bomb sank short of the ship, but the other did not. It punched straight into Broadsword's side, deflected upwards through the deck, then flew tumbling into the sea without exploding. Cabello was dismayed. Their attack had failed to detonate its payload. But the Argentinians were not finished. Behind Cabello's flight came the second wave, led by First Lieutenant Mariano Angel Velasco and Ensign Jorge Nelson Barronuevo, equipped with less powerful, but perhaps more reliable, 250-kilogram bombs. On the British ships, all four contacts now blazed on the radar. Captain Hart Dykes ordered an immediate turn to starboard on Coventry, hoping to give his sea darts a clear shot at all targets. Coventry's missile operators secured a lock on Velasco, and the sea darts turned to bear. A bright flash erupted on Coventry's deck, and a missile rocketed out in a plume of smoke. However, as it launched, Velasco and his wingman flew even lower, disappearing from British radar. The missile, losing its target, flew away harmlessly. Velasco saw the British missile streak past 500 meters to his right, but his eyes remained locked on HMS Coventry. Meanwhile, Broadsword was frantically rebooting her missile systems. Sailors nervously watched blank screens, locked in a race between the incoming Skyhawks and their restarting computers. The screens flickered to life, and the team swiftly worked to reacquire targets. The Skyhawks reappeared on the Seawolf radar. The launchers turned, and the target was locked. Then, a deeply damaging sight unfolded on their screens. HMS Coventry, in her maneuver, sailed directly in front of Broadsword's missile launcher. In their desperate rush to cover all targets, they had inadvertently blocked the only missiles that could actually fire. Broadsword's captain tried to maneuver for a clear shot, but it was far too late. In the Skyhawks, Velasco and Barronuevo were closing on their target. On Coventry, Captain Hart Dykes issued a desperate order. All turrets, fire at will. Cannons and machine guns joined in, firing with everything they had. The main 5-inch gun sent its shells towards the sea, but the men quickly realized the sights were misaligned. This was not the only malfunction. The 20mm anti-air gun jammed. Sailors desperately tried to fix it as the Argentinian planes drew ever closer. In a last desperate attempt, men across the ship opened fire with their rifles. The sea churned and splashed as every available weapon was directed towards advancing Skyhawks, but it was all too late. An echo rang over the intercom. "Everyone, hit the deck!" Men dove for cover, holding on, waiting for the inevitable. Velasco saw the enemy ship fill his view. He pulled the trigger, and his A4's 20mm cannons unleashed a volley of lead across the ship's deck and superstructure. He held the trigger down for as long as he could, then released his payload. The bombs arced lazily through the air before slamming into HMS Coventry with a profound force. They punched through the hull, the impact echoing through the ship, as two almost hollow thunks, but there was no explosion. The second A4 roared overhead without dropping its bombs, its payload failing to release. Seconds dragged on. The men, dazed and confused, began to get back up, scanning for damage. A voice came through the intercom, reporting a breach, but it was cut short. The bombs detonated. Two immense explosions rocked HMS Coventry. In the air, the Argentinian pilots watched, elated, as smoke poured from the vessel. One explosion, beneath the bridge, ripped a massive hole in the ship's side and destroyed the computer room. Fire moved swiftly through corridors, blasting through the operations room where Captain Hart Dykes and his crew had been working. The second explosion ripped through the forward engine room, starting a deep fire and instantly taking out electrical and propulsion power. Captain Hart Dykes, regaining his senses, found himself surrounded by smoke and destruction. Screams filled the air, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. He staggered to his feet, realizing the ship was listing sharply. He tried his intercom, but it was completely dead. It was no use. He needed to get out. Slowly, Hart Dykes worked his way through the smoke-filled corridors, the ship groaning and cracking around him. Looming out, he found an exit and emerged into the cool, stark air of the South Atlantic. Now on deck, his first concern was for his men, but instead of chaos, he was met by a remarkably professional evacuation. His team of sailors, whose training had instilled every procedure, were springing into action. Men rescued their comrades from smoke-filled cabins, provided medical attention on deck, while others prepared survival rafts and helped more sailors into their survival gear. Hart Dykes felt the deck shift beneath his feet as the hull listed further. Dazed and wounded, amidst the organized urgency, all but Captain Hart Dykes. After every man had gone, Hart Dykes stood alone on the upturned hull of the Coventry. He cast one last, long look around the smoking ship that had been his command. He had done his duty, and finally, as the very last man, he entered a survival raft and drifted away. Due to the professionalism of the British crew, 170 survivors were picked up from the water by HMS Broadsword and British rescue helicopters. Sadly, 19 men lost their lives in the battle. All of the Argentinian pilots made it back to base and landed successfully. He sat on the rapidly tilting hull while others abandoned the ship. They had struck a profound blow, but their victory, however significant on that day, did not turn the tide of the war.